Hey there! Among the many entertaining subtypes of videos posted by the YouTube pagan community are those that deal specifically with resources, things that can help others as they develop their practice. Now, these can be good resources for shops you can go to, they can be tarot deck unboxings and flip-throughs, and of course everybody's on the lookout for great spiritual texts and new, well-written, novel, interesting grimoires or takes on divinatory systems or astrology. But of course, there are many resources out there that don't explicitly cater to spiritual or pagan or witchy folks, but that can be incredibly beneficial as resources in their own right. And in fact, I would make the argument that the resources that, in my case, have become most valuable over time as I've advanced in my practice are not ones that cater to spirituality explicitly or the practice of the craft itself, but are instead ones that I can apply to my practice, either directly or with some modification. And so today I am beginning what I hope will be a sort of mini-series over time in which I discuss one or two resources that I think are really great, but that won't ordinarily make it into these sorts of videos within our community. So today I'm going to be talking about some of the reference materials that I think are really amazing and that I in fact discovered only quite recently, but which I will undoubtedly be hauling around pretty much everywhere with me as the hiking and nature walk season begins. These books are actually part of a series compiled and published by the National Audubon Society. Now, the National Audubon Society is a conservation-focused environmental nonprofit founded in 1905 in the United States, and they publish field guides on various topics. The first was a field guide on North American species of birds that, as I understand it, is still a staple among birdwatching enthusiasts. But they have since expanded their offerings, and I have thus far scooped up 4 of these because they are amazing and wonderful. I will be adding a 5th in short order, and those that I own are the National Audubon Society Field Guide to North American Mushrooms, Field Guide to the Night Sky, Field Guide to Wildflowers, and a Field Guide to Rocks and Minerals. Now, for anybody watching whose practice does involve engaging in wildcrafting or wild harvest or the use of crystals or astrology, I trust you can see the benefit of having a field guide like this. I'm going to use my mushroom field guide to illustrate things for you and give you an idea of what these field guides contain. Now, just to be clear, I'm obviously not being paid by the National Audubon Society. I am not in any way affiliated with them. I am simply a big fan of these field guides and really believe they're a worthwhile resource that I wanted to share with any of you who weren't aware of their existence. So the field guides are essentially broken up into 4 main components. The first chunk of the field guide contains an explanation on how to use this guide to best effect. In the case of things like mushrooms, or any field guide on organic materials like flowers and trees, and yes, they do have one for North American trees, which may in fact be 2 guides broken up into eastern and western regions, and that is another I will definitely be adding to my list. But in the case of organics, the How to Use This Guide section includes diagrams depicting the ways in which different plants or fungi are characterized. And so in this section, this part functions as a sort of glossary for terms that will appear in other sections of the book, and which provides you a kind of crash course on the basic physiology by which species are grouped. The illustrations are clean, clear, easy to comprehend, and themselves a really great resource. In the Mushroom Guide, this first section also includes a brief explanation on the classification of mushrooms, their reproductive and growth patterns, recommendations regarding collecting mushrooms, when to do so, where to find them, and even some technical advice on how to take, for instance, spore prints, which is a process by which one can improve their capacity to identify mushrooms, because the pattern into which the mushroom spores fall can aid in differentiating mushrooms that otherwise superficially look quite similar. The next chunk of the book is taken up with color plates, that is, color images of mushrooms, and this is truly invaluable. These color plates are grouped so that mushrooms that appear similar to one another tend to be clustered together. And in fact, on the left-hand side of each double page, there is a little key showing the overall morphology of the mushrooms that you'll find within this section. Under each color photo is the name of the species, the page upon which one can find a description, and of course, a little symbolic warning when the mushroom being presented is either toxic or psychotropic, that is, contains psilocybin. The next section of the field guide is filled with the detailed information regarding each of the mushrooms that appear in the color plates. These descriptions include common and scientific names, descriptions of their appearance and size, the seasons during which they typically grow and the habitats in which they can be found, as well as comments regarding any similarities they may bear to other toxic mushrooms, their impact on the surrounding ecology, whether they're edible, and in the case of mushrooms, the authors of the field guide also distinguish between edible and choice eating, which is to say, mushrooms that are highly prized for their flavor. The final section of the guide contains indices and appendices, information on mushroom poisoning, and even recommendations on how to cook some of the more delectable species like morels, truffles, and chanterelles. Now, I am wild about mushrooms. They are one of my absolute favorite foods, and they also very much hold spiritual significance as being representative of the cycle of life and death, their mythological ties to deities like Hecate, and in the case of some species, their toxicity or psychoactive properties, which again account for their inclusion in a great deal of lore. Now, for those of you who are more herbally inclined, the Field Guide to Wildflowers provides essentially the same sorts of information, but this time regarding plants that grow wild. And although the name specifically references wildflowers, a large number of herbs are flowering plants, and so you'll find these in here too. Now, just a quick warning, in the case of the Wildflowers Guide, I assume because there's no expectation that those using this guide are intending to consume any of the flowers that they mention, the pictures of the plants themselves do not have a poison warning on them. So for instance, if you go to the monk's hood section, you're not going to see a little X next to it saying, "Don't eat this." However, if you go to the monk's hood description page, they do in fact note that both the roots and seeds are toxic. Now, the Field Guide to Rocks and Minerals is a little bit different in that they separate minerals from rocks. And so there are in fact 2 sets of colored plates and 2 sets of detailed descriptions. In the case of gemstones, the colored plates show both the cut and polished stone, as well as an unfinished example so that you can see both. Now, although I'm unlikely to traipse around running into some of the more exotic minerals in this book, simply as a purchasing guide, I expect it to be incredibly useful. Finally, with regards to the Field Guide to the Night Sky, which includes both several detailed plates of lunar geography, which I thought was wonderful, and many plates depicting all the constellations. One of the things I really enjoyed about this guide was that history and mythology is included in the description section. So besides explaining how to spot specific constellations, how to orient oneself, having a very detailed reference to identify constellations, If you are not yet familiar with the history of specific constellations that you're looking at, the description section will fill you in on some of that mythology and give you a very solid starting point from which to continue your explorations. Now, I'm really thrilled to have found these and anticipate getting quite a bit of use out of them over the next few months in particular. My plan now is that they will all live in my scooter. Yes, I drive a scooter. Ready to be whipped out anytime I find myself in an interesting forest or somewhere that offers an excellent view of the night sky, so that I can both improve my capacity to identify species of plants for harvesting or simply for enjoyment, and in the case of the field guide to the night sky, begin filling in the many, many, many blank spots in my knowledge of astronomy and astrology in a way that speaks to my personal tastes and preferences when it comes to learning. Anyway, thought I would share. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.